Hi everyone, Robert Peake here, the Spontaneous Dungeon Master, and once again back to give you a walkthrough of the Spontaneous Dungeon Master Companion, this time looking at non-player characters, NPCs, those wonderful, colorful characters that we as DMs get to play. So if you haven't already, you're going to want to insert a tab right before where it says NPC Attributes. So that will divide up the cities section from the NPCs section. I'm going to talk about travel and about dungeons a little bit later. Let me give you a quick walkthrough of this, what it is and how I use it. NPCs are one of my favorite parts of being a DM, right? Your players get to play a single character in depth, but you get to play a world full of rich, interesting, bizarre characters, or at least they can be if you follow a few, simple principles and tricks to be able to kind of bring them to life, right? If all of your characters sort of talk like this, and provide quests and side quests, answer questions for your characters, and generally guide them through your world, you're not really playing a real-life RPG, you're basically playing a video game, right? So, there's a lot more we can do than just make these characters generic. First thing I want to point out, and what this first table really points out, is that to be honest, a lot of how we prepare NPCs, in particular when we're preparing specific NPCs that are central to maybe a plot or to a particular type of adventure, is totally backwards from how we want to be preparing NPCs when people are encountering them more spontaneously. Right? So what I mean by that is that yes, understanding kind of their bonds and secrets and how they may fit into this plot, and then giving them a really cool name, and giving them an interesting voice and mannerisms and some distinguishing appearances, a big scar across their face and a cloaked hood to this tall tiefling man, and then putting them in front of the characters. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I certainly have, where suddenly the character appears and says, I need to tell you something you may find very, very disturbing. And the players go, that's great, but could you just tell us where the nearest tavern is? The nearest tavern is 3 doors down on the left. But I really think, no, that's great, thanks, see you later. Excellent. Now, I'm being a little hyperbolic here, and there is a kind of social contract between players and dungeon masters that if you catch a whiff as a player that there's maybe something potentially interesting that's been prepared there for you to check out, you might want to go with it rather than just using that NPC to tell you where the next tavern is. However, I also think that it's perfectly valid and should be perfectly valid and is one of the great things about a real-life role-playing game, as opposed to a video game where the paths and branches are kind of preset, that you can allow your players to just go up to someone and talk to them and see what's there and ask them what the city's like, or ask them, what's going on in the mountains or anything else. And if you can feel confident that you can bring that character to life, particularly if you can bring them to life matching the interest of the players as the players go along, you're not expending really any extra effort necessarily. You're in the moment, you're coming up with cool stuff, you're being surprised in some ways just as your players are about who this is and what they want and how they fit in with their world. You're adventuring alongside them and you're matching their interest and their engagement to your effort. And that's a lot of what the Spontaneous Dungeon Master is about, is matching that interest and effort so that you're not going to great lengths preparing what you think is this amazing character that ends up basically serving like a signpost to where the next tavern is. So, in order to match player interest to characters, this is a reminder. These 6 phases are the typical phases of discovery of attributes for strangers. The first thing you're going to notice is what they look like. Are they young? Are they old? Are they male? Are they female? Are they a halfling? Are they a dwarf? What do they look like? You're going to give some kind of description first. Then, are there any distinguishing appearances beyond the obvious categories that they probably fall into? What do they look like that might be memorable about them, so that it may potentially have some backstory to it. Then they're going to engage with them. That's when you need a voice, and you may optionally want a mannerism as well. And sometimes voices or mannerisms, one or the other, usually can serve pretty well to make this character unique. So what they look like and what they sound like is very often what you get first. It's after that that you may get their name if they're a stranger. And so I don't like to burn up names. I don't like to give a character a name if they're never going to even ask the name, right? And just having them come up and give the name often feels a little artificial in terms of how we really act socially and interact. So finally, at the end of that, if they're interacting quite a while with this character and you think maybe this could be useful to give you some creative fodder to move things along, then you might get into some of their bonds and secrets and relationships and make this a three-dimensional character rather than just a two-dimensional character that you can look at and that you can hear and that you can interact with a little bit. So if you're preparing a character as central to your session preparation or your campaign preparation, if you're using noun-based preparation and the noun you want is a proper noun, is a person, perfectly fine to start with the deep stuff, start with the bonds and secrets, spend some time on this. But if you want to be a spontaneous DM and allow people to interact with a big, rich world out there and feel confident that you can create characters on the fly that people are at least going to believe are not the same character they encountered previously, that they have some distinguishing features, if not actually become quite memorable and interesting and someone they want to interact with over the long term, that's where this section of the book comes in. So the next table is about races, just really pointing out that the typical composition of a town or of a world is very different than that of an adventuring party. So in the commoners column, this set of statistics comes from just looking at the canon about what the typical composition is, and largely it's human. Whereas recent surveys, which was fed into this adventurers column, show that much fewer players are, a lot fewer players are playing surveys, and a lot humans, and a lot more players are playing some of the interesting exotic races, including races that are outside the standard player's handbook. So if you want to get together a group, for example, and a group composition, you can do a few rolls on the commoners table, multiply each roll by 7 or something like that, and suddenly you've got a pretty realistic, believable group composition in terms of the racial composition of that group. If they're coming into the Awning Portal Tavern, you might want to roll on the adventurers table, and that gives you more of the flavor, the racial composition of this group. Again, race, gender, and age, or if you're just at least young or old, are some of the things we will notice very first. We're just kind of wired that way. And so this creates believability if those are the first things they also discover. So next we're going to get into the fun stuff, which is appearance and mannerisms and voice. So in terms of appearance and mannerisms, you can, again, if it's a total stranger, just move on next to this next page, roll on the appearance table. You've got 20 of them, so you probably be able to use and reuse these quite a few times in your campaigns. Or you can, if you think it's pretty likely that they're going to learn the name, or if you need a name, like they say, well, who should we talk to next? Then you may want to flip over to one of the rollable tables, and these rollable tables give you a name and also give you a single attribute that you can work with. It may inform the voice. It may inform, they have some kind of habit. It may inform their appearance. But this can be great for you to just, quickly get kind of a bootstrapped character. And often one attribute can be enough. It distinguishes them, again, from the pool of other NPCs they may have interacted with earlier. So up to you if you want to go to the D20 table of appearance and mannerisms, or if you want to flip over at this point and assign them a mannerism or appearance and a name as well. Then I think one of the most fun sections here is actually a section that you need to fill out yourself. This is the character voices that I can do. So I've filled this out for myself. I've typed it out. I've got all the different voices that I think would be fun to at least try. And here's the thing about voices. So I'm not a professional voice actor, right? I'm a guy that wants to have fun on a Friday night. And the rule to me with D&D is just be bold. And if it works out, it's going to be awesome. And if it doesn't work out, it's going to be hilarious anyway. So go for it is basically what I'm saying. And when you go for it, so you want to pick names. I've picked names out of, I pick characters from a lot of cartoons, actually, because I just think it's fun to do silly voices, frankly, and TV shows and all kinds of things here. And so what I like to do is once I get a voice of some kind, go toward it as best I can. And again, even if I'm not exactly nailing that particular character's voice, there's still going to be some consistency and coherence and believability to the voice that as I'm trying to go in that direction. And they're not going to know that I'm trying to do Yosemite Sam and ending up doing just a general kind of southerny voice. They're going to think that's what I meant to do. You also can play around and take a single voice or voice element and play around with moving it around in how you interact with it, engage with it, right? And what you do with your actual voice. So I'll give you an example of that. So one of the voices I stumbled into that I found out I can do a little bit is Gollum. Gollum from Lords of the Rings. Gollum, her Andy Serkis does very, very well indeed, but I don't do quite as well. Though still, I do it a little bit well. So, obviously, that's a really, really recognizable voice. I might only use that, for purely comic effect. But if I dial that voice back a little bit, make it a little bit snarly, have it shout things like, Briark, Briark, I will destroy you. Next thing you know, you got a goblin voice, right? So that same kind of, place in the voice where it's a little like this, projecting it a different way, snarling a little bit, fun goblin voice. You can also take that same kind of thing you're doing with your voice and make it a little more comical. And the next thing you know, you have the kindly kobold sidekick who works in the scullery making pancakes for his dragonborn master and would do anything to please him. That, of course, is my nephew's all-time favorite characters, his sidekick Zook the kobold, who, every time I turn on that voice, he just, he lights up. So, again, that was one voice that I just found, okay, I can do that a little bit, not perfectly, but I can head in that direction, and if I back it up or even roll it more forward, I've got something I can work with and I can play around with. Other voices, just doing an accent, can be fun. So listen to accents and listen to the few elements of the accent that people really, the things people really do say with that accent. Most people with accents, they go way kind of overboard with it. But just a little bit of a French accent like this, can change the tieflings, for example, because, they speak Infernal, and, l'enfer c'est les autres, hell is other people. And so I decided, yeah, Infernal sounds like French, and these people, so they speak common with a French accent. So that's another thing you can do under the any column. I've got just accents as well as things like just having a blocked nose, having a little bit of a maybe it's just kind of gulping once in a while like that. That could be a whole voice right there. That's getting a little bit into the territory of someone like Teddy from Bob's Burgers. So another example of moving things back or forward or up or down. You can take someone like, you can take someone like Morty, from, I don't know, Rick, this doesn't sound like such a good idea. And then what you can do is you can bring it right up here like this, and you can get it really, really high. And the next thing you know, like, you got this, gnome alchemist who's like totally freaked out that you guys are going to mess up his clockwork dragons. Don't do it. Hey, man, don't touch that stuff. That's a bad idea. That particular gnome clockmaker I had go along with the party on a massive hex crawl. By order of their faction, they had to take him with them. That's another fun thing about NPCs is that NPCs that you love to hate can be just as much fun as NPCs that you feel some connection to. And actually, this guy, when he died, they were sad, even though most of the journey they wanted to kill him as well. So hopefully, that gives you some example of the idea that you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be great, you don't have to nail it in terms of the cartoon voice or whatever it is. But if you head in that direction, most players, I think, will appreciate that you're trying to make an effort toward a voice, and most players probably won't notice that you haven't totally nailed it because they don't know what you're going for anyway, right? So that's the voice part of things. Like I said, I'm not a pro, but there are lots of pros out there. So go ahead and look at the people that really do this right, and they've got a lot more tips about how to do that. But once you do have a pool of voices, throw them in there. It can be particularly fun to have a character show up that the players are interacting with and roll. And then you got to try to do that voice. It's hilarious. It makes the whole thing a total kind of roller coaster ride. Sayings, catchphrases, insults, jokes here on the next page. these just can be great to sprinkle in. Again, use them kind of sparingly. But catchphrases are particularly fun. You have a character that says potatoes, as their kind of benign cuss word. And you know what? By the time they've done that twice, it's a catchphrase. It's a thing. And every time you do it thereafter, you're reinforcing that this character is real, and you may even get a laugh as well. So catchphrases are a great thing to establish and bring back. Again, if the character's going to come back. If not, maybe they said potatoes one time and that's it, and you scratch it off the list and you all move on. But there's insults there as well if they're in an adversarial situation, and just telling bad jokes sometimes can alleviate the tension. If you're in a situation where they've been in a lot of combat or whatever. So modulating things up and down with all of this is good too. Changing up the mood, mixing things up, and that's part of the fun of surprising yourself, is that you're also kind of surprising your players. You're throwing stuff in there that isn't necessarily consistent, because consistency can get really kind of monotonous too, right? Again, all of your NPCs sound like this. You're playing a video game. The NPC rollable tables, there are 600 names and traits here. So 6 pages, 100 each. The reason I do it that way is I run, if I'm running multiple campaigns at once, I can assign table 1 to one group and table 2 to another. Then when I burn up a name, when I use a name, I just strike it through with a mechanical pencil. And so I'm not going to necessarily burn up the whole sheet in multiple campaigns, but I am going to be able to keep track. I'm not going to accidentally reuse the same name or similar attribute for a totally different character. So creating, just tracking this a little bit helps with the whole believability factor. That helps your players know that you care, and that the world isn't going to suddenly glitch. And you got two guys named Uth in your world. So this racial composition is more along the lines of the commoner racial compositions. If you were just rolling a D100 to see who's next. But it also makes some accommodation to the adventurer side of things, where the other type of characters, there's dragonborns and tieflings and aarakocra and that kind of thing, Goliaths. So you do have a little more flavor and color than you would in just a typical commoner composition. And you can see how that's broken down, such that if you just want a dwarf, roll a D10, and from 71 to 80, you can get your D10 dwarf there. Again, if you're just wanting to roll and see, and you don't mind what race it is or anything like that, just roll a D100. For a lot of these, they sound gendered, but you can usually just change 1 or 2 vowels. Anders Stormwind, the human who fidgets, number 31 there. Andera Stormwind, just as easily can be a female human character. Umara can be Umar. So you can move it in both directions, or just change around some of the vowels or scramble the letters a little bit on the fly, and you've got a whole new name that more closely matches the gender or the type of character you're looking for. So 600 of those should last you a little while, hopefully. And finally, we get to the last part. If these NPCs stick around, if they're not just giving you directions to the local tavern, you might learn some stuff about them that could be potential adventure hooks for later, or seeds, or you could find, just spark your own creativity to find ways to weave that into some of the stuff you've already prepared in your quick noun-based preparation session to nudge them along in the right direction. So this is where their bonds and their secrets come into play. They may be part of a larger thing, a larger group of some kind. So they may have relationships one-to-one, and they may have some group ties as well. These last two are particularly useful. I use them in my session zeros as well. So a new adventuring party, there's this conceit that we've all decided to go on an adventure together, but I often go, well, why? And is there any backstory there that may inform player interaction from session 1? So what you can do, let's say there's 5 players there, you have them roll a d4 first, each one of them does this, and you just count off, and so that helps you find the matched pairs, and then you roll a d20, you find a relationship. Our community was destroyed by orcs and we survived. There's a backstory there, so they may have a particular bond. They may interact with each other in a different way than people who don't have that relationship backstory. So it knits the party together. It's a thing that you borrow from Fiasco, another role-playing game. And you can also just roll an overall group tie. The whole party, are keepers of the same secret. and then let the players decide what is that secret, or what was that community that was destroyed, or whatever it is. Let them build up the backstory. But it can knit them together. It also works just as well for these NPCs that are more than just signposts, or people they encounter at a tavern, or baddies they fight with. To have ties to the wider world, and then of course as soon as you pull those threads, you might find the group that they're involved with, and the other people, and these kinds of things. And guess what? Now you got more NPCs to make. So again, the intention of all of this is to give you, in order of how NPCs are typically discovered if they are strangers, a whole toolkit to let you season these characters and make them real and believable and three-dimensional. And I love it when my players just, encounter a new character in the wild, because I get to very, very quickly get a kind of improvisational assignment using these tables and using these tools that I'm doing two things. I'm thinking about, well, how do I fulfill what I rolled here? Assuming I like it, I can always skip or change or pick something else if I want to. But how do I kind of fulfill the mission of this particular role assignment? But how do I also then tie it into kind of the bigger world that's going on here? So that's NPCs. That's how I use this section. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about travel. Hopefully this is a useful guide. Again, the intention with all of this is to help you match your players, so that as they're traveling through your wild and wonderful world, you have stuff you can come up with that matches where they go, making it feel real and believable, and giving them agency, and letting you all explore together.